One president, 4 headlines, and a press corps that cannot agree on whether he is breaking the system or running it. This is Parallax Newsroom. MSNBC framed grueling carrier deployment conditions as a crisis Trump shrugged off. Axios called them merely dismal. The agreed fact is that President Trump dismissed concerns about extended deployments and harsh living conditions aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln. MSNBC emphasized military families and quoted Trump saying the deployment was not nearly long enough, framing his response as callous. The Associated Press centered its coverage on the record-setting nature of the deployment and its connection to Iran operations. Axios used the phrase dismal conditions, but kept its framing relatively neutral. The read, the word doing the heaviest lifting on the left, is crisis, which MSNBC used to elevate a personnel welfare story into a broader indictment of commander-in-chief judgment. The Associated Press, by contrast, foregrounded the operational rationale, Iran, which MSNBC and Axios mentioned only secondarily or omitted entirely. What is verifiable is the extended deployment timeline and the president's quoted remark. What is spin is the characterization of his tone as dismissive versus matter of fact, and the decision to either center military families or center strategic context. The Hill offered a useful corrective by quoting Representative Moore expressing anger, which grounds the emotional response in a specific elected official rather than a generalized editorial posture. Breitbart celebrated Karoline Leavitt as an irreplaceable press secretary, while MSNBC Psaki said she failed the American people. The agreed fact is that Karoline Leavitt is departing her role as White House press secretary. Breitbart led with President Trump's praise, quoting him saying she'd done a great job and calling her not replaceable. MSNBC framed the exit through former press secretary Jen Psaki's critique, arguing Leavitt failed in her duty to serve the public. The read, this story has the narrowest sourcing of the 4, with only 2 outlets provided, and they occupy opposite poles. Breitbart's framing is purely laudatory, omitting any context about why Leavitt is leaving or what her tenure's controversies were. MSNBC framing is purely critical, using Psaki's voice to litigate Leavitt's record rather than report the transition itself. What is verifiable is the departure and the president's compliment. What is spin is the interpretive wrapper. One side calls the tenure a success, the other a failure. Both outlets omitted the actual mechanics of the exit, such as who replaces her, the stated reason for leaving, and whether the departure was voluntary. That structural information is the gap a viewer needs, and neither poll provided. The Guardian warned Trump's drill cuts ignore North Korea's battlefield experience. Axios simply reported the order to Hegseth. The agreed fact is that President Trump directed the Pentagon to scale back joint military exercises with South Korea. The Guardian emphasized the risk, noting the reduction comes despite warnings about North Korea's growing battlefield experience. The Hill framed the story as a directive to Secretary Hegseth, keeping the institutional chain of command in focus. Axios kept its reporting tight, noting Trump told Hegseth to cut back drills without editorializing on strategic risk. The read, The Guardian is the only outlet here that named a specific downstream consequence, North Korea's battlefield experience, which anchors its framing in a concrete strategic concern rather than a generalized objection. The Hill and Axios both centered the procedural reality, a president issuing an order to a defense secretary, which is verifiable. What the center omitted is any assessment of what the drills accomplish and what scaling them back risks. What the left omitted is the administration's stated rationale for the reduction, which might include diplomatic signaling or force rotation demands. The stake for viewers is whether a drawdown is a concession or a recalibration, and neither center outlet offered enough context to judge. CNN credited Trump for claiming a historic crime drop. The Washington Times called it the largest in history. The agreed fact is that the FBI reported a record decrease in violent crime, which President Trump is highlighting as a success. CNN noted the murder rate is at its lowest since the 1950s and framed Trump's response as a personal claim of credit. The Washington Times echoed the scale of the achievement, calling it the largest one-year drop in history. NBC News reported the FBI figures straightforwardly, without foregrounding Trump's reaction. The read, the framing gap here is narrower than it appears. CNN's choice to say Trump touts it as a personal success introduces a subtle skepticism by attributing the claim to the president rather than the data. The Washington Times presented the drop as a straightforward achievement, letting the number stand without attribution to a political actor. NBC News split the difference, leading with the FBI data and leaving Trump out of the headline. What is verifiable is the FBI's reported decline. What is spin is the causal attribution. Neither the FBI data nor any outlet proved the drop resulted from Trump's policies, yet the framing on the right implies ownership. All three outlets omitted what specific factors, policing, demographics, or economics, actually drove the decline. Across all four stories, the pattern is the same. The agreed facts are thin, and the framing does the heavy lifting, so subscribe for the framing gap.